Why was Confucius so arrogant? When rulers indulged in beauty and lost focus, he left. In conversations about governance with kings whose attention drifted to birds in the sky, he walked away again. If a king shared a carriage with a beauty, leaving this great scholar in another, he also chose to leave. Wandering through various states, enduring hardships, he would not compromise his principles at the slightest disagreement. This is Confucius. He earnestly wished to be utilized more effectively, to apply his knowledge to the governance of politics, to bring prosperity to the people, and to set an example for future political governance. However, in this murky world, everyone has their own agenda, and those who aspire to the ideal of the world being a commonwealth are truly rare. Although every important figure held him in high regard, he often disdained them, feeling they were unworthy, thus he followed his own path. When the Tao is not practiced, I would take a raft and float at sea. Yet, Confucius never regretted. China has a recorded history of over 3,600 years, spanning many dynasties, witnessing all manner of steadfast individuals, but there has never been another as defiant as Confucius. Many resilient figures in later generations essentially emulated Confucius's defiance. Why was he so defiant? Confucius was bestowed with many titles, roughly counted, from Yifu, by Duke Ai of Lu to Zhishengxianshi, by the Shunzhi emperor of the Qing dynasty, receiving 16 titles from 15 emperors. The expressions vary, but they convey two main ideas. One is that Confucius was formidable, a sage. The other is that we should regard him as a teacher or xianshi. Sage was not a title given posthumously. Confucius was referred to as a sage during his lifetime. For example, when Confucius was in the state of Wei, his disciple Ranqiu said to the Jisun family of Lu, "The state has a sage but does not employ him. Wishing to seek governance through him is like stepping back to wish to advance. It is impossible." This means that, at that time, everyone in China was aware of Confucius's exceptional capabilities. This recognition came from monarchs, nobles, and even rebels, all of whom acknowledged his scholarly and moral virtues as the highest human achievement. Consider a few examples. When Confucius was 17 years old, a noble of the Lu state, Meng Xizi, on his deathbed, instructed his successor, Meng Yizi, saying, "Kongqiu is the sage's successor. After my demise, you must seek him as your teacher." Meng Yizi followed these instructions and, along with his brother Nangong Qingshu, became a disciple of Confucius. In his 30s, Confucius visited the state of Qi and had a lengthy conversation with Duke Jing of Qi, who was so impressed that he prostrated himself and wished to grant Confucius a fief. When the Ji Sun family's retainer, Gongshan Punyo, rebelled, he'd sent for Confucius. When Wu Dinggong appointed Confucius, the people of Qi heard and feared. The reasoning was as follows: if Lu employed Confucius, then Lu would undoubtedly become strong. Once Lu became strong, Qi, being a close neighbor, would be in trouble. As a result, Qi resorted to a strategy of creating discord by sending 80 beautiful women skilled in music and dance to the Jisun family, with Ji Huanzi effectively in control and neglecting government affairs for 3 days, which infuriated Confucius and drove him away. This sage was admired by many but also feared by those with ulterior motives. What does a sage mean? Confucius himself provided an answer to Lu Aigong, stating that humanity is divided into 5 ranks: the common people, scholars, gentlemen, the wise, and the sage. The so-called sage is one whose virtue is in harmony with heaven and earth, adaptable without limit. Understanding the beginning and end of all things, harmonizing the nature of all categories, spreading the great Tao, and thereby completing the nature of emotions. As bright as the sun and moon, transforming and acting like a deity. The common people do not know their virtue, and those who see it do not recognize it as familiar. Nowadays, when we visit Confucian temples and academies, we generally see an archway on each side, one bearing as bright as the sun and moon, and the other virtue in harmony with heaven and earth. This person, possessing the truth of natural laws and the workings of the universe, was also able to integrate this Tao with human nature to educate the masses. I want people to see me but not know who I am. This represents the ultimate knowledge in political governance. Before Confucius, no one had mastered such a profound and systematic knowledge. People knew he was extraordinary, but they did not understand why. Where his knowledge came from was never clearly stated by Confucius himself, nor did his disciples or the ruling class at the time know, which left them amazed. Gongsun Chao of the state of Wei once asked Confucius's disciple Zigong, where did Zhongyi learn his knowledge? Zigong replied, the way of the civil and the martial has not disappeared, it exists in people. The wise recognize its greater aspects, while the less wise recognize its smaller ones. The way of the civil and the martial is in everyone. How could the master not learn? And why would he need a constant teacher? Zigong meant that knowledge hasn't vanished, it's hidden within people. Confucius had no constant teacher and learned from countless individuals. This might be the reality. Confucius himself said, among any three people walking, I will find something to learn for sure. He also sought knowledge from figures like Tanzi, Changhong, Laodan, and Shixiang, but these do not fully explain the source of his systematic knowledge. Confucius was the illegitimate offspring of the fallen noble Shu Lianghe and the Lady Yanshi through a union not recognized by the nobility, thus he was raised in his mother's household. His mother's family was poor and of low status, unlikely to possess books, a rarity in the era of bamboo and wooden slips, or frequently attend high-end ritual events to meet many learned people. But Confucius was not only capable of menial tasks, he could do even the roughest work, and he practiced the rites and music during his childhood play. As he grew up, he became versatile. In the 6 arts of rites, music, archery, charioteering, calligraphy, and mathematics, he was proficient in every one. The difficult texts such as the Book of Songs, the Book of Documents, and I Ching, he had a deep understanding of, and speaking of personal martial prowess, he was 1 in 100. Among his 3,000 disciples, the most capable fighter was Zilu, who might not even be his match. The whole world knew Confucius was omniscient, so for any unsolvable question, people would turn to him. While Confucius was speaking with Chen Mingong, a falcon dropped from the sky, pierced by a unique arrow that no one could recognize. Confucius looked at it and explained leisurely that it was an arrow from the Su Shenshi, saying that ancient kings had bestowed it according to ritual onto your ancestors, Duke. He suggested searching the old armory, where indeed, upon inspection, it was found that a guard, in a moment of urgency, had taken the stored arrow of Su Shenshi and shot it down. Ji Huanzi discovered a pottery jar while digging a well, which seemed to contain a sheep, yet he claimed it was a dog. Confucius corrected him, stating it must be a sheep, and then provided an explanation. His extensive knowledge and depth of understanding were admired by all, truly a level of genius that defies explanation. Even Zigong couldn't fully grasp it. Taizai asked Zigong, is your master a sage? How is he capable of so much? Zigong replied, oh indeed, he is naturally destined to be a sage, and moreover, he is capable of much. He was a born sage. In fact, the question from Taizai already implied the idea that a sage is born, not made. The highest achievement through acquired learning is only to become a gentleman. This phenomenon isn't surprising, as roughly in the same era, the West saw the brilliant constellation of ancient Greek sages, the Middle East witnessed the birth of Jesus, and in South Asia, Buddha came into the world. This era of a concentrated explosion of human wisdom was termed the Axial Age, by Karl Jaspers. Any of these figures carried a halo of genius that is beyond explanation. What profound knowledge did Confucius possess that earned him such great renown at a young age? This man, who transmitted but did not create, essentially lectured without writing articles or publishing books. Our understanding of Confucius's teachings today mainly comes from the recollections and records of his disciples, which are often fragmented. His followers further elaborated and developed his teachings based on his instructions, but it's difficult to ascertain which parts are genuinely original, let alone systematic. It's challenging to elaborate fully, but we can glimpse the essence through logic. My way is unified in its application, loyalty and empathy are all there is. When the Tao does not prevail, I would take a raft and float at sea. The most succinct expression of Confucius's knowledge is the Tao. In contemporary terms, the Tao can be understood as the universal truths governing the operation of the universe or natural laws. Tao and De are symbiotically related. Tao represents natural laws, the highest principles. In Christianity, this is God, in Buddhism it is Dharma. However, Confucius did not believe in a personified deity and did not consider these highest principles as the result of a will. They are inherent, inviolable laws, also referred to as heaven or collectively as Tiandao. Heaven does not speak, the four seasons proceed, and all things are born. Everything in the world follows the will of heaven, operating in natural harmony. Every material thing, every person, occupies a different position but is under the control of the mandate of heaven. The ways of responding to the mandate of heaven vary, yet there is only one correct way in each case. This individually predetermined compliance with the mandate of heaven is virtue. Dao. Virtue is countless manifestations of the Tao, aligning with it. If everyone adheres to their inherent virtue, a system functions smoothly. Deviation leads to disorder. For example, the virtue of water is to flow downwards. If water flowed upwards, it would create chaos. This concept applies equally to human society, where individuals must uphold the virtue associated with their roles. When Confucius, at over 30 years of age, met with Duke Jing of Qi, his profound conversation likely revolved around the relationship between Tao and virtue. Historical accounts simplify Confucius's advice to let the ruler be a ruler, the minister a minister, the father a father, the son a son, emphasizing each fulfilling their duties towards harmonious governance. The Confucian concepts of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, faith, respect, generosity, truthfulness, diligence, and kindness derive from the relationship between Tao and virtue. To apply Confucius's ideas to governance, one must first comprehend what Tao and virtue entail, understanding the virtues of all things to manage effectively. Confucius is deemed a sage because he, and almost everyone else, believed he grasped the mandate of heaven and the virtues of all things, thus bearing a heavenly mandate. His confidence is thus evident. When Huanzhui sought to kill him, Confucius proclaimed, "I am someone who carries the virtue of heaven, propagating the Tao on behalf of heaven. What can Huanzhui aggression do to me?" Surrounded by the people of Kuang, in dire straits, he declared, "Since King Wen is no more, is not the culture here with me? If heaven intended this culture to perish, then I would not have been able to partake in it. Since I can partake in it, it shows that heaven intends for it to continue. What can the people of Kuang do to me?" Confucius argued that if the wisdom he inherited was doomed to extinction, he wouldn't have understood it. His understanding indicated that divine law intended for its perpetuation, making the threat from the people of Kuang insignificant. This audacity later became a tradition among Confucian masters. At 50, I knew the decree of heaven, a phrase often misunderstood as Confucius resigning to fate upon reaching 50. In reality, he meant that it was only at 50 that he fully understood the noble mission bestowed upon him by heaven. As previously mentioned, heaven has endowed me with virtue. As mentioned earlier, Duke Jing of Qi once considered granting Confucius a fiefdom. However, this plan was thwarted by Yanzi, who argued that Confucians were arrogant and self-righteous, unfit to be subordinates, indulging in excessive mourning and extravagant funerals, unfit to be commoners. Hearing this, Duke Jing abandoned the idea. This incident, known as Yanzi Qufeng, was a deliberate misrepresentation and exaggeration, akin to the Nationalist Party's propaganda during the Liberation War that communists advocated for sharing wives. The motive was likely similar, a political struggle, with Yanzi aiming to prevent Confucius from gaining influence, thereby safeguarding his own status. Yanzi was a wise and intelligent man, but not one who embodied the principle of the Tao that operates under the principle of the world being a commonwealth, thus not truly a gentleman. Later, Yanzi family became one of the leading powers in Qi, contributing to the state's tumultuous political scene. Eventually, Tian Chang murdered the descendants of Jiang Taigong, usurping the state to become a marquis, illustrating the consequences of politicians harboring selfish motives, disregarding the greater Tao. Confucius was indeed a gentleman and even praised Yanzi, saying Yan Pingzhong is skilled in dealing with people. Over time, you come to respect him. King Zhao of Chu also once considered granting Confucius a territory of 700 li, but then Yin Zixi intervened. He argued that King Wen and King Wu started with just a few hundred li of land and eventually took over the entire realm. Now, with Confucius advocating the ways of Wen and Wu, and having disciples like Zigong, Yan Hui, Zilu, 在于, all of whom were exceptionally capable. Granting him land might mean that in a few years, all of Chu could fall under his influence. King Zhao of Chu, who had a profound respect for Confucius, then abandoned the idea of granting him the land. These detailed stories illustrate a point. A significant reason Confucius was not utilized wherever he went was the political leader's ulterior motives, whether out of jealousy or fear that Confucius's reforms might threaten their interests. Such stories were not rare in Confucius's life. Another important reason is that Confucius's Tao was too grand for the impatient, corrupt, and selfishly motivated world of his time. Confucius discussed this with his disciples like Zigong, Zilu, and Yan Hui, but the experiences of Shangyang with Qin Xiaogong might be more illustrative. Shangyang, upon meeting Qin Xiaogong, initially spoke of the emperor's way, to which Qin Xiaogong would fall asleep, showing disinterest, and when speaking of the king's way, he failed to capture his attention. The emperor's way and the king's way, collectively known as the ways of emperors and kings, embody Confucius's ideals of benevolent governance. Qin Xiaogong's blunt refusal was, "It is too distant, I cannot wait." Moreover, a wise ruler shines by his own deeds, gaining fame across the land. How could one sit idly, waiting decades or centuries to fulfill the emperor's or king's way? Confucius's way is indeed challenging to implement, with lofty requirements and necessitating a lengthy period of time. For everyone to act virtuously in their respective positions, setting examples, treating each other with benevolence and mutual respect to achieve harmonious governance, it would take decades or centuries. Which ambitious ruler could wait that long? They seek practical strategies. Eventually Shangyang pleased the ruler with techniques to strengthen the state, something Confucius understood but disdained to offer. When kings asked him about such tactics, he often refused to answer. The records of the grand historian mention that when Wei Linggong asked about military formations, Confucius said, "I have heard of matters to do with sacrifices, but I have not learned about military affairs." Additionally, when the general of Wei, Kong Wenzi, planned to attack Taishu and sought advice from Confucius, Confucius claimed ignorance and departed. Confucius was certainly not ignorant of military matters. In 484 BC, when Qi attacked Lu, his disciple Ranqiu led the much weaker forces of Lu to victory over Qi. When asked where he acquired his military prowess, Ranqiu credited Confucius. Confucius's reluctance to discuss such minutiae with kings, and his hope that rulers would focus not on these details but on the Tao, reflect his ideals. However, during those turbulent times, rulers were primarily concerned with power struggles in a chaotic world, securing their political status, or strengthening their states against invasion or conquest. Even enlightened rulers aspired to dominate their era, like Qi Huangong, who united the feudal lords and sought to bring peace to the world. Whether for self-preservation or dominance, what was required was the techniques to strengthen the state that Shangyang spoke of, not understanding the Tao, aligning personal virtues with it, or setting an example for the people. Everyone recognizes Confucius's sanctity, but because he offered principles of humanity and morality rather than strategies for power, he faced obstacles everywhere he went. The phrase "anxious like a homeless dog" was coined by the people of Zheng to describe Confucius's bewildered and helpless demeanor. That such a disrespectful description of the sage has been passed down through generations is because Confucius himself acknowledged it. Indeed, he said, affirming the accuracy of the description. However, it's important to note that Confucius's wanderings, aside from a few instances of being pursued, kidnapped, or besieged by schemers or misunderstood by the public in places like Pu, Song, Huang, Chen, and Cai, were never due to being expelled. His reputation was too significant, no ruler dared bear the stigma of expelling the sage. He left because he saw that the Tao was not being followed, holding the other party in contempt, choosing to take his leave, to leave on his own initiative. For instance, when serving as the chief judge in Lu and witnessing the Ji Sun family's obsession with the women entertainers from Qi, he left in disgust. When Zhao Jianzi of Jin, a person of authority with intentions of governance reform, summoned Confucius, and Confucius was on his way, about to cross the Yellow River, he heard that Zhao Jianzi had killed the virtuous Mendo Mingdu and Shunhua, and he immediately decided to terminate his journey. Facing the Yellow River, he lamented, "Beautiful are the waters, so vast. If I do not cross this, it is my fate." When Wei Linggong traveled with Confucius and allowed his favorite concubine Nanzi and some eunuchs to share his carriage, leaving Confucius to follow in another, Confucius remarked, "It is over. I have yet to see someone who loves virtue as much as beauty," and then he left. Leaving, again and again, under various circumstances, defines the 14 years of Confucius's travels across the states. Aware that leaving meant another difficult journey, he proudly said, "A bird chooses a tree to nest in. Can a tree choose a bird?" During tough times, Zigong said, "The master's way is too grand, hence the world cannot accommodate him." Could the master perhaps lower his expectations a bit? Yet, Confucius maintained his high standards, despite the challenges. Confucius replied, "A good farmer tends to his crops but may not always harvest. A skilled craftsman has high expertise but may not always work according to others' wishes. I aim to elucidate the Tao, establish principles for governance, and oversee all matters, yet I am not accepted. Duanmuzi, you are not focusing on learning the Tao but are preoccupied with being accepted. Your ambition is limited, your vision is too short-sighted." In the realm of politics, Confucius truly was a defiant, ready to leave at a moment's disagreement, never clinging to comforts. For thousands of years, Chinese intellectuals have had individuals of integrity, standing aloof and independent, never compromising their principles in political matters, embodying the character model set by Confucius. Before Confucius, China did not have independent intellectuals. During King Zhou of Shang's reign, Meibo, Shangrong, and Bigan faced unrighteous politics and protested with their deaths because they were nobles with almost unlimited responsibility towards the regime. Confucius said that Bigan protested to death because he was King Zhou's relative, they were family. A gentleman should maintain independence, fulfill his utmost duty, and if still powerless, leave the regime without guilt if it continues to defy the heavenly order. A bird chooses a tree to nest in. You have wings, not a caged pet. This is the tradition Confucius established for Chinese intellectuals, the Daotong. Confucius was a Yin person, a remnant of the Shang dynasty, whose ancestor Fu Fa could have become the ruler of the Song state but ceded the position to his brother, Duke Li of Song. In the Shang dynasty, the most knowledgeable were the priests, responsible for divination, conducting ceremonies, and even organizing funeral rites, acting as directors of the funeral committee. After the fall of Shang, the Zhou dynasty closely monitored the Shang remnants, confining them to small areas like the Song state, surrounded by various dukes. The original nobility, especially intellectuals, lived in constant fear, treading on thin ice, leading to a very timid character over hundreds of years. Confucius's ancestor, Zheng Kaofu, was a high-ranking official in the state of Song, serving 3 dynasties with increasing humility, even to the point of degradation. Upon one command, he stooped, at the second, he hunched, at the third, he bowed. Walking close to the walls, none dared to insult him. Hu Shi, through his research, argued that the Confucians, descendants of the Shang dynasty priests, originally embodied a sense of timidity. Accustomed to non-resistance, they would turn the other cheek when slapped, embodying the principle of the suffering without contesting. By the spring and autumn period, the Zhou dynasty's control over the remnants of the Yin had weakened, allowing these intellectuals a degree of thought freedom. Yet, many still preferred to avoid confrontation, adhering to his suffering without contesting, a style more akin to Taoism. In this original sense, Taoism could be considered more authentically Confucian than Confucianism itself. However, Confucius was not like this. He believed he was endowed with a heavenly mandate, and the Tao and virtue he mastered, representing the will of heaven, were supreme and could not succumb to any coercion. Thus, despite his wanderings and multiple dangers, he never regretted his path and was never afraid, stating, "A man like me cannot be killed." The concept of a mandate of heaven, Tianmin, is not an artifact of the Shang dynasty but was inaugurated by King Wu and the Duke of Zhou during the Zhou dynasty. The ideological stance during the Shang was that power and people's fates were protected by ancestors, with the Shang king's ancestors only protecting their descendants, making sacrifices from others futile and unauthorized to seize power. After conquering the Shang, the Zhou introduced the concept of the mandate of heaven to legitimize their rule. Heaven would not favor a specific family but would support those who followed the Tao, granting them power. This notion of the mandate of heaven provided legitimacy to the change of dynasties and laid the groundwork for the end of the feudal era. Confucius explored the concept of the mandate of heaven deeply, tracing its roots to discover that the Tao demands governance characterized by benevolence and love for the people, as the populace is the foundation of politics. The people are not means to a political end but the end itself. The mandate of heaven is essentially reflected in the will of the people. In the Kongzi Jiayu, he stated, "The ruler is like a boat, the people are like water. The water can carry the boat but can also capsize it." The Tao sets moral standards for politics and for everyone. To govern is to correct. If rulers lead by moral example, in accordance with the Tao, then, when the sun leads by being correct, who dares not to be correct? Rulers should be virtuous, but not everyone is inherently virtuous like Confucius, endowed with virtue by heaven. The virtue of rulers is acquired, necessitating Confucian scholars to first master the Tao and virtue themselves, and then to teach the rulers, aspiring to bring forth rulers like Yao and Shun, achieving governance through benevolence. Indeed, Confucius's statements are logical and well-founded. The Ishang Shu, Tai Shurg from the Zhou dynasty articulates, "Heaven sees as my people see, heaven hears as my people hear." Heaven's perspective on politics, observing actions and listening to words, is channeled through the common people, reflecting the legitimacy of a regime. Treating people as the end goal of politics represents a monumental shift in political philosophy. Before Confucius, the majority were enslaved or fixed in low social statuses. Confucius enlightened the Chinese that if a regime lacks benevolence, ignoring the well-being and demands of its people, its legitimacy is questionable. At such times, intellectuals must not succumb to power but should align with the perspective of the people, correcting power. The will of the people is the mandate of heaven, the Tao. Hence, throughout history, there have always been intellectuals who advocate for the people, standing firm in their convictions, following the Tao rather than the ruler. This legacy left by Confucius is a precious inheritance to the world, shining brightly even today, embodying timeless ideals. If you like this issue of the video, please help me point a free like and subscribe, and say what you think of the issue of the video. Your support is my motivation to create videos. Thank you. We'll see you next issue.